Hello and welcome to our fair, honest and as unbiased as possible review of SeriousSam 3 VR. And in true Game of Muscle fashion, we're just going to get straight into things. No wish-washy, no nonsense, we're off. And that means the video will be shorter and you can go back to your Wafoo simulators in no time at all. So first things first, is SeriousSam 3 VR BFE, let's have more abbreviations, a good game or not? It's really good, really fantastic, really fun, really nice VR implementation. If you like first-person shooters, this is a good VR title to get. And if you've never played through the game before in 2D, I would recommend playing through it here in VR, and you'll really enjoy it. So, good game, well done, Crow Team. I don't even know how you say the name of their company, but we'll call them Crow Team from now on. That sounds like some weird SAS Special Forces team. Crow Team. Otherwise, it sounds like you're saying Crotum, which sounds like scrotum. So I'm going to go with Crow Team. So anyway, what we do typically with these Game of Muscle reviews is we go through the good points and we go to bad points, and we alternate until we've covered all the pertinent points. So let's start off with what I think is the most important good point with SeriousSam 3, and that is the developer has given a ton of options when it comes to VR implementation, and specifically the VR comfort and the choice there out of the box to be able to have free movement, sort of traditional first-person shooter movement where you use your analog stick or your touchpad to move around. You can use the touchpad to move your character literally like as you would in Quake, Doom and what have you, or you can use the direction that you move your hand to just decide the direction you're going in, or you can have it so that it follows the direction of your head. You can choose which hand is doing what. You can flick rotate with one hand if you're using a front-facing setup, for example, or if you're just lazy using room scale and you don't want to keep turning all the way around. The game also has teleportation, in like a zoom teleportation. You can have it blink teleportation, and you can have it so that you've got like a parabolic that comes out of your hand, so you can teleport on top of things, not just straight at stuff. Then it also has VR comfort options where it will zone out the surrounding area, sort of vignette the game for those that get motion sickness from the movement, and you can choose at what point that kicks in and how large that vignette is. Ultimately, every option's there, anyone can play it. If you get motion sickness, use teleportation. If you're a highly evolved being, such as myself, then go for the 90s classic movement and you'll have an absolute blast. So, 10 out of 10 for the basic comfort VR implementation, giving the players the option and allowing people to play it however they want to. Absolutely superb, Crow Team. Good job. On to a bad point, the difficulty of the game seems to be a lot easier in VR than 2D, and I think this comes from the fact that you dual wield by default in VR, whereas in 2D you don't. Obviously, you've just got a mouse on a 2D mouse mat. How pathetic! But in VR, you dual wield any weapon you want, and that makes some weapons like the shotguns super powerful, whereas they wouldn't be before. So you will probably want to play this on a slightly higher difficulty in 2D than a higher difficulty in VR than you would if you played it in 2D. The difficulty there is in knowing what difficulties to set, because the SeriousSam games do ramp things up a lot and can get really hard later on. So if you set that difficulty too hard, it can then get quite frustrating. But with it on the medium to high difficulty that I was playing this on, you definitely notice some boss battles don't end up being that much of a boss battle, because you can just run around like a lunatic with two shotguns spamming the boss in the face and they die very quickly. So I think the balancing of the boss enemy's health is something that could do with being improved in this game. A good point now, we do slalom between good and bad here like a deranged virtual reality Olympic skier. A good point, the graphics engine and the performance of this title. Now, I'm like some kind of elevated Lord of the Manor using a 1080 Ti at this point in time, because we've been sent one to review. I'm very grateful for that. But I do appreciate not everybody has the luxury of such glorious silicon, apart from maybe women in California. But what I have found with this, and I played the previous SeriousSam games in VR on our 1070 graphics card, and obviously with this game engine itself being slightly old, quite old, very old indeed, almost black and white. But the advantage of that is, like with Live for Speed, for example, it tends to run pretty well even on lower end systems. So even with our 1070, as I say, before we had the 1080 Ti, I used to play the other SeriousSam VR titles, and they all ran pretty well, even with some super sampling. So I've not tested it myself. I don't know for sure. I don't have the actual data on this. I don't have any actual facts, but I would be very surprised if it didn't run well on lower end systems. Maybe even if you turn the graphics down, a 970, for example, should, I think, run this all right. Maybe let us know in the comments if you've got this and you've got a lower system. Actually, let us know some facts rather than some assumptions. With the 1080 Ti, though, we're running the game at total 100% maxed out, and then 1.5 super sampling on top of that. The game is so crisp, I don't know where it starts and stops, where reality and virtual reality begins and ends. Absolutely fantastic, and it just looks awesome playing it with those with that crispness that you get from the super sampling. Not to brag, but it is nice being able to do that. What isn't nice, though, is the fact that this is SeriousSam 3, and it's an old game, which I've played through most of it in 2D beforehand, and it would be really nice if this was actually a new game. I'd actually like to see more classics type FPSs with this VR support in them, but new games. So you can't blame them, because it is what it is, and they've done it really well. But it's like, it's so good playing this in VR. I would like a new game. I can understand the budgetary reasons why that's not possible, but it's a really unfair bad point. We had to have a bad point there, and it's just sad. I would like something new that was exactly the same game, but not a repeat of the previous one, if that makes sense. However, on the good side, we just segued from bad to good there, if you didn't notice. On the good side, SeriousSam 3 is genuinely a fun game. You have a good amount of content there with different levels, a super cheesy story that's terrible, but it's meant to be terrible, so it's quite enjoyable in that way. It really feels like some kind of like Namco Time Crisis type plot. It's that bad. It's awful, the story, but that's the point of it. But the actual game mechanics, the way the different enemies come at you, the different types of enemies, the progression of the levels, they're having a boss at the end of each sort of chapter, the whole structure, there's a lot of content there. It's interesting, it's engaging, it's enjoyable. And then when you combine that the original game there with the new VR mechanics, in that you've actually got the guns you can actually aim with your hands, and the fact that VR is way more immersive than 2D and it actually places you in the game more, it adds a whole new layer to the previous game, and in my opinion, in many ways makes it more enjoyable, or if not more enjoyable, it just makes it a different way to play the game that's equally as enjoyable as playing it in 2D. As a proviso to that, I would say if you're playing it with the teleportation rather than the classic movement, it can feel a little bit more janky and not as precise. You can tell that the game is, with the way the AI works and with the way everything is designed, you can tell fundamentally you really need the free movement there to properly experience how things work. The side strafing's important, and if you take that away, which you can do with the VR options, I think that does damage the gameplay a little bit, though it is still perfectly playable. You can get through it and you can still enjoy it. It's better played in the classic way, but then benefiting from the immersion and the aiming that you get with VR. So fundamentally, it's SeriousSam 3 in VR. And it's incredible. It's so much fun playing through this so far. It's just it totally contrasts with the whole bloody shooting gallery nonsense that we've been having in VR. Now, I understand developers don't have huge budgets to do completely to do big FPS shooters with environments and all the content required for that. I can appreciate that, but a shooting gallery is a shooting gallery. And I have to say, other than Space Pirate Trainer and maybe a couple of others, shooting galleries generally just feel stale and boring very quickly. Whereas when you've got the free player movement and you're going through an environment and you've got a structure there, it's a lot easier to get more addicted into it and to want to keep playing through it. It feels like you're going through something rather than just doing some arbitrary task. A negative with the single player as it is presented. It does have cutscenes in the game, and unfortunately the cutscene camera placement is often a bit off. It's hard to know where you're supposed to be looking at times, and it'll go through these cutscene cameras. They've done it so it's comfortable, so it's not like you're flying around all over the place and getting motion sick from it. But often you find there's a cutscene before a boss battle, and or a pertinent direction you're supposed to go in, and you might be looking in the wrong place, and so it's not exactly really obvious where you're supposed to go or what you were supposed to be looking at in the cutscene. It's more of a little niggle than a game-breaking flaw, but it's a little bit annoying. It does sort of take you out of the game a little bit when you've just been really frantically playing in a first-person view and you're totally in the zone in the game as Mr. Serious Sam, and then you're in a cutscene view and you're like, oh, that's a bit weird. Now, as another good point, I would say the graphics are pretty damn fantastic. Now, as I said before, it's an old engine, so the advantage is it runs well, but it also does then look a little bit dated in a sort of definitive sense. I mean, it doesn't look as nice as Robo Recall in terms of the raw textures and the geometry and everything. But having said that, one thing that Crow Team did really well with this game, as it was back in the past and as it is now in VR, there's nice, you notice there's lots of grass in the levels, but lots of little details. Grass, of course, is really important. A game that's got grass is obviously much better than a game that doesn't have grass. But you notice when you're running through the grass, you're like, oh, it feels like it's hitting your legs in some way, but they're not actually hitting them because it's not real. The architectural design, though, is really nice, especially the Egyptian parts of the game, the temples and the buildings, and you really, in VR, really appreciate the scale of the architecture in the game. So you go into a big open room with like a glass ceiling on it, and it is a really big space, and though that looked at the time when this game came out quite nice in 2D, and that's quite an impressive thing, especially with SeriousSam 1 when that first came out, because it was a big jump from other first-person shooters. But in VR, again, you look at these buildings in VR and it looks absolutely superb, because in VR you are obviously actually inside of the game, so the scale of the buildings really is very striking, and so graphically, despite it being an older engine, I think it stands up really well. Another aspect of the graphics that really looks nice in VR are the particles when you shoot the exploding screaming men and blood goes everywhere, body parts fly past you. That's really nice. But also the smoke that they leave behind when you've got hundreds of them on the screen, or sort of 50 or so of them on the screen, you shoot them all blowing up, and there's just smoke everywhere and you're trying to peer through it. But the smoke, though it is just a simple, what appears to be like a sprite system, it looks really effective. It does really look like smoke in VR, and you're sort of trying to peer through it to see what's behind the smoke, and inevitably it's one of those creepy bloody horse things charging at you. So visually, absolutely stunning. Architecture, particle effects, also the textures do actually look quite good, especially when you're bumping up the game super sampling. That makes all the textures look nice and sharp as well. The floors are really nice and detailed. The sky looks like a nice sky. There's nothing when you're playing this that makes it look like horrendously bad. It's really quite immersive visually. I can't really fault it visually, to be honest. It runs well and it looks nice. What more could you want? Now, I want to go to another negative in keeping with the whole negative positive thing, but I'm really struggling. I'm struggling to find other negatives. I mean, what is there to say? Because it is really good. It's really good, and they've done such a good job with everything. Maybe the UI, I guess, could be a little bit more clear. Let's just shove all the negatives I can think of here. We'll just shove them in at this part of the video. The slalom's finished. The UI could be a little bit more clear. I prefer it when your sort of health and stuff is on your weapon. Maybe if you could position it a bit better. But it doesn't really matter as it is. But it's not always 100% apparent what your health is, or it can be hard to look at your health quickly when you're in the midst of one of the later on battles and it gets a bit more hectic. When you're firing quickly with the triggers using the Oculus Rift controllers, sometimes you can actually accidentally find yourself pressing the grip button to jump. Though I guess you could rebind the controls, and you can hold the controller slightly different to mitigate that, or just hold down the grip at all times. So there really isn't much more negatives to say about this game, other than the fact that there's no multiplayer. Not because there isn't multiplayer, there is indeed multiplayer in this game. It would be very nice to play. but there's nobody playing the multiplayer. So we weren't able to test it or review that or really talk about it, which is a shame because, you know, that's a whole other facet of the game. And from when I used to play the 2D version of the game, it's actually quite enjoyable. So unless you've got some friends that you can organise a game with, that's not going to happen. So that is a real shame that it's not a little bit more active. And let's face it, you're in VR, so you probably don't have any friends. And your virtual girlfriend in your Wahoo simulator certainly won't be able to play this, so that's out of the question as well. Maybe we can arrange something with people. That would be nice. But there you have it. That's pretty much the main negatives and positives of Serious Sam. And in conclusion, I'll end by saying that this is a fantastic game to play. It's really fun, and as I said at the beginning, if you haven't played through it before in 2D, it's well worth playing through it in VR. So that's the end of our review. Our good bad review, mostly good. This is a title, in my opinion, that you should get for VR. As I say, crucially, dear God, if I have another shooting gallery, I'm going to have a mental breakdown. And again, this just goes to show you how much more engaging, how much more addictive, how much more enjoyable having actual freedom of movement and an actual thing to play through is than here's some random stuff floating around and shoot in front of you that you've got to shoot, or some targets. Not that all shooting galleries are bad, as I say. Space Pirate Trainer and some of the gun simulators are actually really quite good. There are good examples of them, but there's just too many of them. So, anyway, regardless of that, definitely, if you like virtual reality titles, do give the subscribe button a tickle. We do VR, we do a lot of driving simulators, we do flight simulators. That's what this channel's about. If you're playing on a low-end peasantry system, let us know in the comments how well it runs. For other people that are running around in the slums of low-end peasantry systems and they want to know if they can play this, that'd be fantastic. And, yeah, thanks for watching. Take care. Off to have a cup of tea. Goodbye.